time before the sun rises is the most peaceful time of the day. There is an unequivocal question in every layer of the dawn's beautiful sunrise that asks, what are you going to do with this one glorious day? It's a little cold, everything is quiet, and life is about to awaken. The dawn landing in Gallipoli was carried out by 4 infantry battalions of the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Australian Division. These men came from what Charles Bean, Australia's official historian, called the outer states, being Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania and Queensland. On the dawn of the 25th of April, despite their efforts to get inland and the landing of the bulk of the infantry, the Anzacs were held by the Turks on an area of the peninsula about 1 kilometre deep by 2 kilometres long. By evening, the little cove to the south of Aribanu, soon named Anzac Cove, was crammed with the wounded who had made their way down or been carried down from the front line. Turkish shelling, which had begun within an hour of the initial landing, also took an increasing toll. All told, more than 620 Australians died that day, with most of them coming from those rural districts, country towns of those outer states. Very soon the landing turned into another trench warfare-based stalemate, which was what the leadership was hoping to avoid. So 8 months later, the skill and planning that did not appear to be there at the beginning was found at the end. With a near-perfect withdrawal from the peninsula, in total, over 8,700 Australians were left at Anzac Cove. 1 year later, and 101 years to this day, people in nearly every town and city in Australia, as well as the 2,000 veterans of that Gallipoli campaign who were in London, gathered to reflect on that tragedy. The first dawn service. Because people did not have the opportunity to bury their loved ones, cenotaphs were erected as a place to pay respects. 3 months later, those same Australians that marched in London were now fighting in Fromelles in France, where we lost 5,500 soldiers in one day. And by the end of the year, 40,000 Australians were killed or wounded on the Western Front. By the end of the First World War, Australia mourned over 60,000 deaths, which was the highest casualty rate of any Western Army, of 64.8%, or 38 deaths per day. For the soldiers who returned home, 4 out of every 5 were injured or disabled, and every single soldier was hospitalised 3 to 4 times during the war. This tragedy literally touched every single Australian. The 25th of April represents so much more than just Gallipoli. It also marks Villa Bretonneux, which actually was where our national monument to the First World War stands. But 65 years ago today, it also marks the Battle of Kapyong in Korea, where soldiers from Australia, Canada, New Zealand and the United States denied a ruthless offensive by the Chinese Communist People's Volunteer Army, preventing a breakthrough on the United Nations Command Central Front and ultimately the capture of Seoul. The 25th of April is the date that the consciousness of nationhood was born, but this consciousness is not celebrated. We stand here in the darkness to reflect on the sacrifices of brave men and women who went before us and continue to serve today. Australia's official First World War historian Charles Bean wrote that the Anzac spirit stood and stands today for reckless valour in a good cause, for enterprise, resourcefulness, fidelity, comradeship and endurance that will never own defeat. Australians are always willing to do their part, and I believe it has been proven in the past and remains today. As I stand before you, NH-90 helicopters have returned from Fiji, supporting the recovery from Tropical Cyclone Winston, which was the largest hurricane in the southern hemisphere, destroying large portions of Fiji's infrastructure. We still have soldiers in Afghanistan, and we still have the new Anzac battalion in Taji training Iraqi soldiers to fight against ISIS. This regional middle power, with a population the same as the state of Texas, knows the feeling of being alone and surrounded by an imbalance of culture and beliefs. And whilst our capabilities may be limited, our resolve is not. We help when someone asks, and we get the bloody job done. It is worth noting that the concept of a new world nation is not the only thing that Australia has in common with the United States. Every subsequent conflict after the First World War has been with the United States. This mutual alliance of values has developed partnerships that have been both economic and strategic through the signature of Anzac in 1951. But our enduring bond has lasted much longer than that. The United States embarked the Great White Fleet to Australia as early as 1908. This event identified a combined interest in our future security of the Pacific, which has matured into something greater today, which is an absolute assurance that Australia will stand beside you. There are many examples that I could use to describe the recognition of mateship between our two countries. From the establishment of General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters in Brisbane in July 1942 to the Special Operations Task Group in Afghanistan. We have fought together in locations as Korea, Iraq, East Timor, Borneo, Papua New Guinea, Somalia and Afghanistan. But one story that I would like to recall is from Vietnam. This story is about the monument illuminated next to me. The 135th Assault Helicopter Company, Experimental Military Unit, or EMU for short, was assigned the Huey in 1966, and at the same time the United States government requested Australia for more helicopter pilots. The Royal Australian Navy Fleet Air Arm was all that was left uncommitted. The pilots from 723 Squadron, Royal Australian Navy, were fully integrated into the unit, hence the insignia having Army wings and a Navy anchor, as well as their motto, "Get the bloody job done." No separate national policy, no divisions of protocol, no issues of interoperability or questions of national security. Over the next 5 years, this unit would be involved in some of the most significant operations throughout the Vietnam conflict, over 5 separate bases, accumulating over 121,000 hours and operating 147 aircraft. However, as you can see, this came at a price. The 36 names of soldiers and sailors from both countries are etched side by side, as was the unrelenting bond that was shared then and is honoured today. These great men and women that sit amongst us in this quiet dawn know each of the names personally and carry the tragedy and sacrifice experienced by war in their soul. These great people that quietly walk among us are the true heroes, and it is an absolute honour to recognise them this morning. Our soldiers of today, who stand around us, are also carrying wounds that will never repair. Australia owes a debt of gratitude to the United States, which is not merely recognition of agreement signed some 60 years ago. The fighting men and women of our respective nations have shared the same battlefields for many years. With the many facets of asymmetric war, as soldiers, warriors, teachers, aid workers and diplomats. So to all of you standing, we say thank you. And so on this quiet corner of Fort Rucker, before the sunrise, we pause to acknowledge that our freedom has been bought at a great price. Today, we as nations say thank you to those that have been so willing to give, and those that continue to place themselves in danger for us and our nations. I will finish today with a quote from our Prime Minister, Mr. Malcolm Turnbull, who said, "We do not boast our victories because we know they came at a cost to us and to others. We do not parade missiles and tanks in an ostentatious display of might. We choose as one in a moment of silent contemplation, in tribute to those who fought and died so that we could live in freedom. Lest we forget."
Ladies and gentlemen, At this time will now lay wreaths. Colonel Francis and Lieutenant Colonel Barton will lay a wreath in honour of the fallen. Isabella Barton, Alice Barton and Emma Francis will also lay a wreath on behalf of the future generations. If anyone else at this time would like to lay a wreath, please come forward. I would now like to call the veterans of the 135th Assault Helicopter Company to read the honour roll.
Specialist 4th, Richard Fred Kavanaugh.
Warrant Officer Bernardo Francis Genji.
Captain Robert Dean Fleer.
Specialist 4 Larry Gay Gould.
Private First Class Robert Allen Labuda.
Warrant Officer Alan Eugene Starr.
Warrant Officer 1 Glenn Douglas Moore.
Specialist 4 Gail Lee Linlach.
Lieutenant Commander Patrick John Vickers.
Specialist 4 Ardell Arjun.
Warrant Officer 1 Herschel Joe Bullock.
Chief Warrant Officer James Edward Sloan.
Specialist 4 William Irwin Fennell.
Warrant Officer 1 Ronald Bruce Stillings.
Lieutenant Anthony Austin Casidio.
Warrant Officer 1 Willard Lee Clemens.
Petty Officer O'Brien Cedric Phillips.
Warrant Officer 1 Donald Warren Cook.
Warrant Officer 1 William Michael Miller.
PFC Richard Lee Harrington.
Warrant Officer 1 Stephen William Childers.
First Lieutenant Lenny Guy Ladusa.
Specialist 4 Ernest Dean Dodson.
Captain John Spurgeon Spiller.
Second Lieutenant Anthony Jeffrey Hewlin.
Specialist 5 Larry Evan Stone.
Specialist 4 Larry Randall McPherson.
Warrant Officer 1 Terrace Francis Mazzara.
Specialist 4 Boyd Bill Bowden.
Specialist 4 Dennis Michael Martelli.
Warrant Officer 1 Stephen Lewis Martin.
Warrant Officer 1 Terry Pascal Knight.
Captain Dennis Michael Phillips.
First Lieutenant Noel Charles LaPlante.
Leading Aircraftsman Noel Irwin Ship.
Specialist 4 Harvey Michael Reynolds. Specialist 4 Larry Elmer Steppy.
Proud Thanksgiving, a mother for her children. England mourns for her dead across the sea. Flesh of her flesh they were, spirit of her spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. Solemn the drums thrill, death august and royal, sings sorrow up into immortal spheres. There is music in the midst of desolation, and a glory that shines upon our tears. They went with songs to the battle, they were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
poem written during the First World War by Canadian physician, Lieutenant Colonel John McRae. McRae was inspired to write the poem on the early morning of May 3, 1915, after officiating over the hasty burial of friend and fellow soldier Alexis Elmer, who died in the Second Battle of Ypres. The heavy damage done to the landscape in Flanders during the battle greatly increased the lime content in the surface soil, leaving the poppy flower as one of the few plants able to grow in the region. Looking at Elmer's poppy-covered grave, McRae penned a poem that would become a symbol of remembrance during most British Commonwealth memorial ceremonies, as is the case this morning. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, fell dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing end, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Let us pray. Greater love hath no man than this, and he laid down his life for his brother. May their memories forever remain in our hearts. And may we take courage by God's presence, knowing that each life matters to him, that he also knows heartache and loss by the sacrifice of his own son. Now, Lord, give us grace for each day, strength to serve, and may your mercies follow us all the days of our life. Amen.
This concludes the formal proceedings for the morning's dawn service. I would like now to ask Lieutenant Colonel Retired Fred Dunaway to come forward for a brief presentation.
Good morning. Good morning. I think congratulations go out to Colonel Bartlett and his assistants, staff, on another fine memorial ceremony here this morning. And I thank him for this opportunity for a special award to one of the Australian Navy men. If you're a member of the 135th, would you raise your hand if you were in Vietnam? You can see there's a good many people here. That's been a long time ago. Thank you. In the past 7 months, 49 years after the involvement in Vietnam, the Australian Navy has created the first of its kind award to go to a group of 135th and soldiers and sailors identified as the forgotten heroes. These brave men were mechanics, clerks, cooks, equipment operators, and administrative personnel. At a moment's notice, would step forward to volunteer for one of the most dangerous jobs in the unit, but were never recognized until just recently, that is. Of course, we're talking about the brave volunteers of the door gunners. They quickly learned when they became a door gunner how to fire the M60. A lot of times they learned how to fire it on route to the mission. We have a former member of the 135th with us today who qualifies to receive and wear the new gunner wings. The Commodore of the Navy Fleet Air Arm in Australia mailed me a set of wings and asked me to pin them on an Australian able seaman, Jim Shaw, during the ceremony this morning. Jim Shaw attends this ceremony annually and arrived from Australia just a few days ago. It's an extreme honor for me to present these wings to Airman Shaw because I was his commanding officer 48 years ago in Vietnam. Without further ado, come on up. I'm going to read this. You got the citation. Here you go, lad. Just bring that little tab. I'd like for the 135th personnel to hang around a little bit on there after the service. That concludes it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this morning's Anzac Day service ceremony. You're welcome to continue enjoying the hospitality at the pagoda and enjoy the gunfire breakfast. Thank you.
On an unofficial note, I'd like to ask Carol and Mrs. Barton to please come forward. They've been patriots of us for a long time. I'm talking about the 135th, and we'd like to present you with this tray. To Lieutenant Colonel and Mrs. Charlie Barton, in appreciation for your friendship and kindness during your tenure at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Presented on April 25, 2016 on behalf of the U.S. Army, Australian Navy personnel who served with the 135th Assault Helicopter Company in Vietnam from 1967 to 71. I'd like to point out, this is an Australian crocodile, and that's a U.S. alligator. That shows you the bonding that still exists between our two nations.
Eat my food, drink my beer.